Good afternoon. My name is Diane English, and I'm the Director of Research, Policy, and Communications for Parks and Recreation Ontario. Welcome to the webinar, An Introduction to New Regulations for Children's Recreation Program Providers. And just a couple of reminders again. I know those of you that have been on the line have heard it before, but your lines are muted for now. But there is a chance to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can use the chat box on the side of the screen to enter your questions. And again, please try to keep the questions general, as I may not be able to answer specific questions about your program. So let's get started. There are three outcomes for our webinar today. I will provide an overview of the legislative changes that have already come into effect. We'll review at a high level the new regulations that will have an impact on recreation programs and confirm the implementation and transition timelines. And we'll learn about the work that PRO and other stakeholder organizations are doing with the Ministry of Education to continue a smooth transition through this phase. First, a bit of background. The modernization of the Ontario child care legislation and regulation began several years ago. When the government introduced its plans for full-day kindergarten, the responsibility for child care was moved from the Ministry of Children and Youth Services to the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education undertook a multi-year consultation process with a phased approach to implementing new regulations and legislation. In 2015, the Child Care and Early Years Act, or the CCEYA, came into force, which has already meant changes to the kinds of programs that municipal, nonprofit, and private organizations can operate with and without a license. We'll cover those in a minute. Earlier this year, the ministry released draft regulations for public comment. Some of you participated in the webinar earlier in the spring, where we reviewed the proposed changes. Now, those regulations are mostly finalized and are being phased in beginning in September of this year. Just a note that some of you may have seen the news stories that the ministry is revisiting the child-to-leader ratios and age groupings, which were proposed in the draft regulation. Now, this only affects licensed programs, and the ministry is actually working with licensed providers to do some pilot testing on the kinds of ratios, what ratios and age groupings will be most effective to stabilize child care. So that's something we're monitoring, but it won't really have an impact on the delivery of the majority of our recreation programs. So the final implementation isn't actually going to happen until 2017, September of 2017, and that's something that PRO had asked for, is a bit longer transition time. So that was some good news for us. So let's just take a quick look back at the Child Care and Early Years Act, because it's been a while since this act was introduced. The CCEYA received royal assent in December 2014 and came into effect in August of last year. Our recreation stakeholders were pleased to see that recreation was recognized for the vital role that it plays in meeting community need and keeping kids healthy and active within this new legislation. So, to keep things consistent with what had been the practice in the past, the Child Care and Early Years Act provides for exemptions for certain types of recreation programs and exceptions for others. Now, exemptions are those kinds of programs where recreation is the primary purpose and it's outside the scope of child care. We'll delve into that a little more in a minute. Exceptions, however, means that a program, while it doesn't require license, it may be subject to regulations and guidelines because it is considered by the ministry to be care. It comes under the purview of the Ministry of Education as part of that continuum, and it's very narrowly focused. We will be looking at those specific regulations as well. So the primary purpose is care, so it runs 5 days a week as in the after-school time period as an example. You might notice that there is a shift from the old system to the new system. The old system was focused on exempting providers, but now they're looking at the type of program, and the exemptions and exceptions are based on that program type rather than on who is providing the service. So let's first talk about the common types of programs that are not affected by the Child Care and Early Years Act. So anybody who's providing services as a nanny, a babysitter, or providing care by relatives, that's just not even considered to be part of this continuum. Day and overnight camps for kids over the age of 4, offered on non-instructional days, like during March break and summer camps. Those do not require a license, even though some rules apply about how many weeks you run a camp. You can't run a camp for 52 weeks a year. You can run for 13 weeks a year. Child minding is exempt from licensing. So that's where the parents drop the kids off and then they go to another service or program in the same facility. So think of child minding in a fitness center or for maybe a language program that a parent may be taking and the child remains on site there as well. Nutrition programs are also exempt, so that was where you might offer a breakfast program before school. So the real purpose is a nutritious meal or snack. Also, private schools can run programs that only care for kids over the age of 4. So the first type of exemption that we're going to deal with is that recreation as primary purpose. The Act says that programs that have as their primary purpose recreation are not considered care and are therefore exempt from licensing and regulation. However, the ministry has put in some parameters in a regulation to help us define what that means exactly. So broadly, programs that are of short duration and frequency are considered recreation as primary purpose. Think of the 1-hour lessons once a week, swim, dance, artistic skills, whatever they would be. Team sports, so any kind of team sport activity, including baseball practices and games, even if you had 4 practices and 5 games, that is exempt because it is recreation as primary purpose. And club activities that are offered once a week, like Girl Guides, 4-H, anything like that. Any religious instruction is also exempt, and programs that run on weekends. So they are not concerned if we're running recreation programs that are 3 or 4 hours on the weekend, maybe on both days. So as I said, there are some criteria that the ministry is going to use to help us define what recreation as primary purpose is. In Ontario Regulation 137.15, there are listed 6 factors to determine the primary purpose of a program, whether it is recreation or care. These factors are the hours of operation, including the frequency and duration of the program offered, the ages of the children enrolled, whether or not transportation is provided to and or from the program on behalf of the parent, the type of facility, the equipment and the furnishings used to support that program, the programming content, including how time is dedicated to recreation and care, whether registration and administration of the program is coordinated with one or more programs by the same provider. So each program could potentially be measured against these factors. So some of them seem pretty vague, and we'll be talking about some of the issues that we're running up against currently, because these 6 factors are already being used by the ministry to define what a recreation program is. So the interpretation of the factors, sometimes it's challenging to providers to understand what these factors mean. They were meant to be flexible, but they're also too open to differing interpretation and application without further clarification. But the danger is if we put in more clarity, will it become too prescriptive and that there would be unintended consequences of restricting programs even more? Some of the issues that recreation providers are finding with these factors include drop-in programs or programs that run every day at the same time, but they have a separate barcode. That means parents must register for each program separately on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday. that are running for younger children. We feel as a sector that those programs parents are using those programs not as care but on an as needed basis, because maybe they work shift work and they only need it once a week, or they're stay-at-home parents and they just want that socialization for their younger kids. It seems that the ministry, that there's not enough flexibility within those 6 factors to accommodate a program like that, and that's something that we're working on with them to clarify. Young programs for kids under the age of 4 might be considered care and would require a license in this case. So what many recreation providers are doing is they're reviewing all their programs to ensure that the focus is largely focused on recreation, and that the registration process really supports community need. So I'm going to stop and take a break here and just ask if anyone has any questions about recreation as primary purpose and the kinds of programs that would fall into that category. Again, at the end, I'm going to review those programs that are exempt, the ones that we really don't need to worry about, and then also those ones that will continue to need to be looked at in terms of the upcoming regulation. So we have one question coming in from Lori. I'll just wait for her to type it. Lori writes, you mentioned that PRO is working with the ministry to define exemptions. Do you know when results will be shared? Yes, I do, Lori. That's a great question. That's addressed later in the webinar, but I'm happy to talk about it now. The full implementation of the new regulations is not expected until September 2017. So actually we'll be working over the next year with the ministry to help define more clearly some of the factors where we're having trouble fitting our types of programming in, and PRO is actually interested in collecting some data from providers. So PRO will definitely be keeping members up to date as that rolls forward. So we're going to now look at those programs that have recreation as a secondary or complementary purpose. And what does that mean? Broadly, there's a great category called Authorized Recreational and Skill Building Programs. The short form that the ministry is using is called Authorized Rec. I think it's a nice way to put us into a framework, understanding that quality programs exist within recreation. So the Ministry of Education did want to recognize the important role of quality recreation. And so within the Child Care and Early Years Act, they included this category of authorized recreational and skill building programs. These programs are considered to have care as the primary purpose and recreation as a complementary purpose, because they run 5 days a week and up to 3 consecutive hours per day. The ministry has also prescribed that this type of program should be offered only for kids age 6 to 12. There's a caveat there in that currently, in this transition time, the age restriction does not apply to all types of organizations, and I'll get to that in a minute. So I think most of us would recognize this kind of program as an after-school program for kids, for school-age kids. So as I noted, a couple of things that while these programs are exempt from licensing, they are subject to some regulation for quality. And they're very broad, and right now it only consists of the factor that it must be up to 3 consecutive hours a day, and the children would be over the age of 6 or older, or turning 6 by the end of that school year, so grades 1 and up. One of the changes that has happened is that we cannot, without a license, offer before and after school programs, cannot operate without a license, because that would likely exceed the 3 hours, unless your before school program is strictly a nutrition program. I know there are lots of communities that are offering before and after school programs, and we are in dialogue with the ministry to understand how, when a program really is meeting community need, where there is no licensed provider to offer that service, and it is a barrier for an organization to have a license, how that community need can still be met within this framework. So that's one of the changes that I would like to highlight today. And so I said the first word we saw there was authorized. So what does authorized mean? Authorized programs under the old system, under Ontario Regulation 797, recognition as a children's recreation service provider was granted through a blend of local approval mechanisms and third-party accreditation processes that were not very consistent and were not available all across the province, and they were varying in their level of oversight and quality. So the new regulation continues to recognize many of the same sport and recreation entities or organizations as authorized providers, while also giving local service system managers the ability to authorize programs or providers, to respond to the specific circumstances and needs of their community. So in the new regulation, there are a number of organizations that are listed that are already authorized. So if a program is operated by a school board, a First Nation, a Métis Nation of Ontario, or a municipality, if it's operated by a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club of Canada, if it's an Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport funded after-school program, or if the program is being run by a club, a member of a provincial sport or multi-sport organization that is recognized by Tourism, Culture and Sport, or it's an MTCS agency or attraction, such as the Ontario Science Centre. So programs run in those organizations. So that's a pretty big swath of organizations. Those organizations are able to offer programs without going through any additional authorization process, but they still must meet the same regulatory requirements as everybody else. So then, what about those other organizations, all those great nonprofit organizations that are doing fantastic work? They will go through an authorization process conducted by the local service system managers. Some of you may know those as the Consolidated Municipal Service Managers or the District Social Services, now I've forgotten what it is, the DSABs, the boards that work in the north. So they can also determine if a program meets the standard of authorization. So there's a new role for these local service system managers as applies to recreation. They're responsible for the overall planning for the provision of care. And now that we have recreation as part of that, they will be looking at recreation as well. And as I said, they're responsible for determining an authorized recreation program if not offered by one of those organizations listed on this page. So I'm going to stop here again for questions, and Sarah has typed in a question already. And she asks, has the ministry looked at the age for allowing 3-year-olds attending camp if they are turning 4 by the end of the year? This would be old enough to mean that they were going to school but not allowed to enter camp. Sarah, that's a great question because, yes, this is a major area of concern for organizations that are offering recreational programs, recreation-based programs, camps during the summer for kids who are going into JK. Why a kid whose birthday is in September would not be allowed to attend the same camp as their cohorts who would be entering the same, entering JK at the same time, does seem a little bit arbitrary, and it's something that we're in discussions with. We haven't had a lot of success. The Ontario Camps Association has also been lobbying to have some flexibility around this. They've been quite clear, and it dates back to the Ombudsman, a report that the Ombudsman made to the province, looking at those children who are most vulnerable, those being children under the age of 4, and that those children should largely be in licensed care. Can we offer programs maybe 2 to 3 times a week for a couple of hours for that age group? Absolutely. And so it may be a matter of just changing the way we schedule our programs in order to meet the needs of those kids who still need that socialization to get ready for going to school, who aren't in full-time daycare because their parents are Maybe they have one parent staying at home, or they have other arrangements, or they're homeschooled and their parents just want some socialization. So yes, that's an excellent question and one that we continue to dialogue with the ministry on. I have another question from the City of Ottawa, which is coming up. Pallavi from the City of Ottawa has asked, can the Consolidated Municipal Service Managers authorize before-school care program if we are not offering a breakfast program? So the next year is going to be very interesting because the Consolidated Municipal Service Managers are really just getting up to speed with the new regulations as well, and having to deal with all of this new information about recreation programs and what's allowed and what's not and what can be licensed and what can't. So the answer is right now is that they're just trying to catch up to speed. The idea would be that they're going to be ensuring that there is the provision of the kind of program that is required in a community. But I think initially they are probably going to stick with the letter of the legislation and be fairly strict to keeping recreation programs to 3 consecutive hours a day. So if you were offering an after-school program plus a before school that was an hour and a half, they may say, no, you need a license for that. However, if you offer in one location, you're offering a before school, and then in another location, it's an after-school program still offered by the same municipality but different location, they may say that is okay. It's really still a bit of a gray area around the before and after school. Michael has asked, what is the purpose of being authorized? Is it to apply for specific funding? The idea of being authorized dates back to the earlier legislation, because there were no before this, there were no regulations or authorization for recreation programs. They were just allowed to operate. So the ministry brought in some criteria. In the past, a nonprofit organization would have to seek authorization to run a program without a license through the municipality. That was impractical, or they would have to become a certain type of organization. So the reason for doing it is to allow a recreation provider to run a program without a license. That's the reason for the authorization process. So if you don't get authorized, you have to have a license. If you are an authorized provider, by either through the list that the ministry has created or by going through the authorization process through the local service managers, then you can run that program without a license. And also, I would say that the authorization process is really about quality. Part of this exercise was to ensure that there are quality programs available for Ontario families, and Parks and Recreation Ontario has been working with a lot of stakeholders to ensure that the current quality standards, such as High Five, are recognized through this process for all those organizations that have invested in quality through High Five, through their own policies and procedures, that those are recognized. All right, we're speeding through, so I'm just going to move on, and please feel free to type in questions as you think of them, or I will be breaking shortly again, because we're going to talk about the timelines next. So what is already in place? Here are the changes that we've already, already what is in place. We consider it really positive that the Child Care and Early Years Act does recognize quality recreation as part of the continuum of child care. Already in effect is that camps for kids under the age of 4 will require a license, and as we noted, that's quite firm. The children have to be 4 at the time of the camp. The 6 factors for determining the primary purpose of a program are already in place and are already being used by the Ministry of Education to say that a program can run with or without a license. So if that test is not met, a program may require a license. And now what changes when? As I mentioned, there's a phased approach. The first phase comes into effect on August 29th, and it's going to be one full year of transition to the full implementation. So what happens on August 29th? Really, not much is going to change for us. That list of recreation providers that may operate programs for up to 3 hours on weekdays without a license, and again, municipalities, First Nations, MTCS after-school programs, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, that list comes into effect. Operators that provide before and after-school programs in the same location may require a license as per the Child Care and Early Years Act. The listed providers can still offer 3-hour programs on weekdays for kids, for kids for kids of any age up until September 1st, 2017. It says ages 4 and 5 there, but it actually should be just kids of any age. Sorry, that was a leftover from a previous version. So, as we noted, the local service managers will be responsible for local planning and deciding this authorization, but they're not ready to go with full implementation, and so the Ministry of Education is playing a larger role during this transition year. So just to be clear, listed providers can offer 3-hour programs weekdays for kids of any age up until September 1st, 2017. So there was, for those of you that are really nitpickers for detail, there was a transitional regulation that expires on January 1st, 2017. Really all that means is that that regulation expires and the new one that says we have until September 2017 comes into effect. So really not much is going to change in there. The 3-hour programs that were covered under one regulation just move to being exempt under the new regulations. What does change is that providers, that some providers who are not listed providers, so a nonprofit, may have to go through that authorization process in order to operate without a license. So and here it is again, but providers, those authorized by regulation, will still be able to operate 3-hour programs weekdays for kids of any age until September 21st, 17. And then as we go to September 21st, 17, that's the phase 2 of authorized recreation coming into effect. So recreation providers must comply with Section 6.4 of the Child Care and Early Years Act, which means that those authorized recreation programs can only be offered for children aged 6 to 12. If you want to serve kids under the age of 6, you will require a license. You can still run other types of programs for kids under the age of 6, lots of opportunity. You might run programs 2-3 times a week for 1 to 2 hours. Those are still okay. Those are not off the list. And by that time, we hope also that the local service system managers will be fully up to speed and being able to authorize nonprofits that are not otherwise exempt, and that they'll be doing some local system planning with recreation in mind. So just to review, general recap of those exemptions, because it was a while ago that we talked about those. So those episodic recreation programs offered for kids of any age, that's the 1 hour once a week for 8 weeks, or a couple of times a week, or sport programs, sport leagues, exempt. Camps for kids under the age of 4, they're exempt now. They'll be exempt in 2017. Child minding with parents on site, recreation and sport programs that run on the weekends, and nutrition programs. So, when in doubt, most times the recreationist's primary purpose will be evident because of the duration and frequency and focus of the program. But we're just recommending that we carefully review our programs to ensure that recreation is the primary purpose, where you might be a little unsure. Reviewing your registration practices and registered information. How are the families using your programs? Are they really only using them once or twice a week, or are parents using those 5 days a week for the same child? That's what the ministry would be looking at to determine if it is care or if it is a recreation program. So again, you can modify the times, the offerings, the content of your program to still offer parents and families what they require in terms of having some socialization and having that recreational experience, but it doesn't look like childcare. So and then if you are in doubt, if you still can't understand or can't figure out whether your program requires a license or not, you should be contacting the Ministry of Education at information.met@ontario.ca. So I'm just going to stop here. And Sarah has asked a question: what is the age cap on this? And I'm not sure what the age cap is for exempt programs. There is no age restriction. So if you're offering swim lessons or any kind of, maybe it's an arts and crafts for once a week, 1 hour a week, there's no age restriction at all. I hope that answers your question, Sarah. Lori has asked a question: was there specific mention of PA days, typically 8? Yes, so PA days are non-instructional days. So providers can offer camps for children over the age of 4 on non-instructional days. That would be a PA day, March break, or summer camp, as long as you do not exceed 13 weeks a year. And I have another question coming in from Sarah. All right, Sarah's taken a minute to type in her question, so I'm just going to go on. So I'm just going to talk again about the new guidelines. So we mentioned that there will be guidelines for authorized recreation programs that we might have to comply with. Those guidelines are not set. Again, they're meant to be very high level, and they're meant to support programs to improve and enhance quality, and they're going to be based on accepted industry standards such as High Five or those standards used in WISE and Boys and Girls Clubs as a basis. There will be options and different pathways that organizations can take to meet the quality requirements so that they can offer an authorized recreation program for kids aged 6 to 12. And again, it doesn't apply to those exempted programs. It's simply for that very specific niche. The guidelines will be used by the Consolidated Municipal Service Managers, and we also want to ensure through this process that the local service managers are involving recreation in that local planning, because we know that there's lots of stuff that goes on in recreation that is not currently part of the child care continuum but is helping support child care. So we want to be sure that both recreation and licensed care programs are available and that parents have the choice to use the kind of program that suits their needs the best. As I mentioned, this will be fully implemented in 2017. And I'll just finish off this before I finish answering. Oh, I will answer questions now. I guess I'll just add to that PRO is working with stakeholders on the guidelines, working with the ministry, with WISE, Boys and Girls Clubs, and municipalities to ensure that we are helping to enhance quality through this process. So Sarah's question says, what happens if my 3-year-old in JK turns 4 on December 4th and can't go to the PD day camp? That's a very good question, Sarah, and one that we actually haven't broached with them yet. So I've written that one down, and I'm going to add that to the list of things that we will bring up with the ministry. My sense is that for the one day, they're not going to require an organization to have a license, but again, that would be the practical thing and perhaps not what might happen in reality. So I don't want to say one way or another, that I would bring that up with them and seek clarification, and hopefully they can add that to the frequently asked questions page. So Nikki has asked to clarify, we will no longer be able to run a program for more than 1 hour that is recreational based. No, that's not true. I just give the 1 hour as an example, Nikki. they use all of the 6 factors to determine what a recreational program is. So they're going to look at all of it together, not just time. So I say 1 hour, but it could be a 2.5-hour craft program for kids aged 2 to 4 that runs once a week. They may say if you're running that program 3 times a week, that's starting to look like childcare. But if it's only once a week and it's 2.5 hours, or if kids are dropping in throughout that time, that kids aren't using it for the full time, there are a variety of factors that they are looking at. So I'm sorry if I gave the impression that 1 hour is the only thing that's good. No, they look at all of the 6 factors together. So I hope that answers your question, Nikki. And Pallavi has asked, can a 2.5-year-old go to a program for 2 hours 2 times a week? Our indication is that the ministry is looking at the program content, but that as a general guideline, they're saying 2 hours twice a week is good for kids aged 3. They haven't said specifically about age 2.5. And so again, I would just be looking at the program content and how parents are using it and dealing directly with the ministry on a program like that. City of Oshawa has able to ask, are you able to confirm that we are okay to run a camp for children under the age of 4 until September 2017? No, camps for kids under the age of 4 are not allowed anymore. That is actually in the Act. You can run a 3-hour program 5 days a week for kids under the age of 4, but I would not call it a camp. I would call it a program. Yes, so camps, half-day, full-day camps are not, must have a license if the children being served are under the age of 4. I hope that's clear, City of Oshawa. I have another question coming in from a few people, and so I thank everyone for your attention this afternoon. You've been a great crowd, good questions coming up. I will copy all the questions from the chat box down to make sure that I am able to bring those forward to the ministry where appropriate, and so that we are keeping this dialogue open. As I mentioned, this webinar will be available on the PRO website, and a link will be emailed directly to all participants. So I'll just pull up the next slide while people are typing. You may want to just take a little screenshot or copy this down. If you have any questions, I'm happy to speak with anybody. Unfortunately, I'm on holiday for the week starting tomorrow, but call me back in a week and I'd be happy to speak with you. The Ministry of Education, I've heard varying things from people in the field with having responses from the Ministry of Education, but I think if you use this email, they're responding quite quickly, and you'd be dealing with licensing and enforcement when you get the contact from that email. So Tammy has asked, how do we decide if our after-school drop-in programs are exempt or not? Offered 5 days a week, but difficult to track attendance. The ministry is generally saying, so if you're offering that program, Tammy, for kids over the age of 6 or over, then it would be considered an authorized, and you're working for a municipality or an authorized provider, that's authorized recreation and skill building. So if you're running it for 3 hours, or they're a little bit flexible on the 3-hour time thing, a little bit flexible, and I'll address that in a minute, then you fall under that authorized rec category, so you can offer that program. If you're offering that program for kids under the age of 6, now this is all, again, starting in September, so for now you can continue to offer that program because we're in the transition time, but starting in 2017, you can only offer that kind of program for kids over the age of 6. Michael's asked if you'll receive a copy of the PowerPoint. Yes, it will be. A link will be sent to you. So a quick word about the 3-hour time limit. So programs, the Act says specifically that programs will run up to 3 consecutive hours. But the ministry recognizes that often You might be providing a program for a school, for two schools, and one end gets out at 2:45 and the other one gets out at 3:15. So your program actually has to start at 2:45 and run to 6. The ministry has indicated that 15 minutes, 20 minutes, that's not going to be a problem in the up to meeting the criteria for the duration of the program. They understand that sometimes there does need to be flexibility there. Janet has asked, in the past we have offered a stay and play type program on various mornings in the week that's giving parents the choice of what day to attend. Is this program going to cause an issue if we're offering the same program on multiple mornings in the intent of meeting community need? The short answer to that question, Janet, is that yes, the ministry would review that, and if you were offering the same kind of program 5 days a week, for instance, or even 3 days a week for younger children, again, generally they're concerned with kids under the age of 4, that they may say, you know what, that is a care type program, even if you look at your registration data and it says, look, nobody's using it more than twice a week. They may say, okay, change the registration process then and make it 3 separate programs or something like that. They just want it not to look like a child care or a daycare. Another question, who can we refer parents to if they have questions? And so the first I'll answer that question first. There is a parent FAQ page on the Ministry of Education website. If you received the invitation to this webinar, it asked you to look at a web page prior to this webinar, and it links you to a Ministry of Education website. There's also one for parents, and it actually, the Recreation frequently asked web page of the Ministry of Education is quite plain and simple and would be good for parents to understand why this has happened and what the reason for doing it is. And the second part, how would the ministry find out if a program has broken the rules? There are no site visits. This is not meant to be. Something where you will receive an authorized recreation provider visit or anything like that. It's basically on a complaint basis. However, know that during this transition time, there are the ministry is looking carefully at municipalities, especially in the kinds of programs that they're offering for younger children. There may be other providers who are looking at programs offered in their community, and other licensed providers who are saying, hey, that recreation program really is care and it should have a license. So they could make a complaint to the ministry. The ministry would then come and assess your program and provide you with a decision as to whether you required a license or not. So there's a lot of programs, so let's just talk about the volume of programs in recreation, and understand that the ministry doesn't have a whole lot of a capacity to be checking every single program. I think we want to do our best as a sector to provide quality programs that are in line with the general direction that the ministry is heading, which is enhanced quality, ensuring that there are choices available for families. Because the reason part of the reason that this is happening is because when children entered the full-day learning system, licensed care became destabilized. When those 4- and 5-year-olds were not in care all day long, there needed to be some adjustments to the system. So we're having some growing pains while this adjustment happens, while the ministry finds out how to stabilize childcare and to still have the options that parents want in those fantastic recreation programs that you're all offering. So it's a little bit of a balancing act right now, but I think as a sector we can do a lot by providing quality programs that are meeting community needs, where we are trying as much as possible to look at and understand the legislation and work within that framework so that we can be recognized. So you guys had a lot more questions than my first group. Wow, I don't know whether that's good or bad. We have about 15 minutes left, and I see a few more people typing, but again, you can always email me your questions. I really thank everyone for their time today, and specific questions about your programs, I'd be happy to chat with you. City of Oshawa has asked, is a half-day camp 5 days a week for children 3 years of age okay to offer? The answer to that is no. The program you cannot offer anything that is called a camp that runs for more than a couple of hours twice a week for kids under the age of 4. You can absolutely offer that program, half-day camp for kids over the age of 4, but not under. You can operate it with a license, right? You can go and I know some communities have said, you know what, this is a great opportunity for our community to run some licensed camps, but you need to look carefully at the needs in your community, and if licensing is a barrier, then you need to look at your programming to find other ways to serve those kids and to offer the programs that the community needs. So that's more questions coming in. So if you do have to jump off, I do appreciate your time, but I'll stay on as long as questions are coming in. So I'll just put up the big thank you. Pro really, really appreciates the support of the sector, those that have contributed to this process by providing recommendations and feedback. We really, really appreciate the support and hope that we've been able to offer some solutions and some information for our stakeholders. There's a question come in, any progress on if we can have a 4-year-old in a day camp but not after school? So yeah, so it's kind of ironic that you can have a 4-year-old in your program 13 weeks of the year full-time, but during the school year you can't have that 4-year-old in an after-school program. That's one of the challenges that we are facing. And we want to understand how the ministries can help us meet community need and still stabilize childcare, because the issue is that those 4- and 5-year-olds needed to be put back into licensed care where feasible and where parents choose that. But our point continues to be with the ministry is that parents need choice. So what kind of programs can we offer for kids age 4 and 5 in the after-school time period? That's what we're looking to define. And Nikki has asked if our before-school program is run by a municipality and it's not a nutritious program, is it still acceptable to offer come 2017? If you're offering only a before-school program and not a before and after, yes, that would fall into the authorized recreation category because it's less than 3 consecutive hours. But if at the same site you're offering a before-school program and an after-school program for kids, for kids, school-age kids now, any age kid, or 6 to 12 in September 2017, the ministry is saying that that kind of a program where you are offering both before and after school would require a license. We've got a few more questions coming in. And again, if you do have to jump off, thanks for joining. Again, I'll go back to my email. And apologies if I don't get back to you until around the 16th of June. And please feel free to email the ministry as well. Someone has asked, why don't municipalities get licensed? What are the drawbacks to being a licensed daycare provider for recreation programs? That's a great question. Some of the requirements for becoming licensed may not work for recreation providers because the cost of the program would go up because of the staffing costs for a licensed program. Recreation programs are often based on a lower cost structure. So they're providing a low-cost option to parents who may choose that, who may want that kind of an option as well. Lots of recreation providers may not have the furnishings and fittings available to them for a recreation-based program to become licensed. So you need certain sleeping arrangements and washrooms and other kinds of things that are not always available to providers, especially in older community centers where you might be running a program. So those are some of the barriers that recreation providers would face. But as I noted, some providers can obtain a license. Some recreation providers can obtain a license. All right, here's your last chance. I provide you one last chance to type in a question. And Tammy has finished her question, and she says, how do we determine the age for drop-in participants if there is no registration? If you are publicizing your program to be open to any age, that is what the ministry would consider. If a parent chooses to say, yes, my child is 6, but clearly they are 3, you may want to have staff prepared for that, but the ministry would be looking at at how you're marketing that program. Are you marketing this program to 2 to 5-year-olds, or are you marketing it for 6 to 12-year-olds? That's the age they would consider. So I don't think they're specifically looking at that. If you are offering drop-in programs where it's not child-minding, where there are a variety of children in that setting of different ages, it might be something that you want to consider using those 6 factors to look at your programming content. Mary has asked, just to confirm, a 2-hour program that runs twice a week for children under the age of 4 is acceptable? The short answer to that is you need to look at all of the 6 factors to determine if that program is recreation or not. So while duration and frequency, what you would say, yes, that seems appropriate for that age group. If the program content, if the furnishings are not in line with what a recreation program is intended to look like, then the ministry could rightly say, no, that doesn't meet the test of the full 6 criteria. So, for instance, if it looked more like a daycare than it looked like a recreation program, in other words, there was no physical activity, there was no skill building involved in that program, they could say, well, no, that program really is childcare. But I think for the majority of the programs that come from a recreation department or a recreation provider, we would argue that 100% of the content is recreation focused. So I think for the most part we are safe in our program content, but you really do have to look at all of the 6 factors. And as we noted, they're not super clear, and they're not, if you go and look at the legislation, it's not any more helpful other than what I read and what was on the slide. So that's where we're trying to work with the ministry to have a bit more flesh on the bones there to help us decide. But I think your gut will tell you, yeah, this is a recreation program once you start looking at them. So if there are no more questions, again, my friends, thank you so much. On behalf of Parks and Recreation Ontario, thank you for participating today, for spending your time. And again, if you have any feedback, any questions, please send them to me. We are only as good as our collective knowledge. If you've had specific interactions with the Ministry of Education, I'd love to hear about it. Great participation today. And I will leave the previous slide up just for a couple more minutes if you wanted to take this information down. And thank you, everybody.